like Rapha's game is so positionally based. He's not really an aim player, but when you put him on that map, he can be such an insane aimer just on the fact that he already knows all the positions he's going to take. He's not thinking about taking shots and hitting shots. He's just like, oh, I mean, this is the position I take. This is correct. And it's such a positional map and it runs at such a high pace that he's constantly putting himself in sick positions. So he's just going to be hitting like a madman, and he usually does. It's quite amazing to watch. And here we go, right off the start. You can see that Rapha's with a worse stack, but he's got a better position. He's got all the weapons, and Mellow right now doesn't have a railgun, so Rapha's going to be at an advantage, longer range. And with the Mega coming up, Mellow will take that, and Rapha's still just going for position and damage over much else right there in that spot. And now he has the Mega time, so Rapha really has all the information he needs to be informed enough to make a decision. And he's just going to go for the quick challenge on the red. He's a bit coy so far. Yo, Mellow going for the challenge. Mellow wants to commit completely here, and Rapha's, after that initial damage, he's like, sure, it's a sure thing, and he goes for it, gets the frag, and onto Mega. I mean, it's quite straightforward so far, but this is a really dangerous position for Mellow, because really Mellow's best possible chance to win this against Rapha is to have a good start, and to have a lead to work with, but now he's got to play against a Rapha in control.
Right now.
It's not going to be pretty.
I mean, actually, when we were talking before, Rapha and Toxicity, Rapha, I think, might be the only player I can think of in Quake Live where on every single map he's one of the absolute best. Like, he's top 5 on every map. Even the other great players, they have some maps they're like #1 on for sure, but then they have some where like they're not as good on, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas he's the only one where even the ones that were like the aim-heavy maps, he could figure out. Like, remember, he beat Cooler on 24 in an IEM final. He literally, on every type of map, he figured out a way to be the best. And that's also because he doesn't just have one style that he applies to every map. He changes it based on the map and based on the opponent. So that gives him that diversity.
Yeah.
Some of the other players lack a bit, you know.
Yeah, he's built in a lot of areas of his game. Like, a lot of people will formulate a style, and then they'll have that style in practice, and that's how it works. Against every player and every map, it's all about trying to make, like, being able to force their style. The Rapha has, like, in his game, like, he talked about this before when he watched Evil play, like, he watches certain situations, and he's able to see how Evil reacts in certain spots, and then is able to, in the future, quickly make those adjustments in his game, so that they are tailored to Evil in that situation. So, because he knows that he knows now what he will do, and like what will be the optimal reaction to hit the way that he's playing. And that's incredibly difficult to do. That's like...
Well, it's because this is actually one of when you break down skills in game, reading in game is a skill of its own in the same way as reading an opponent after the game is a skill. So when you played him, right, next time you make adjustments and you beat him next time, okay, that's one skill. It's a totally separate skill to read during the game while it's happening and make on-the-fly adjustments. Because a lot of players, their execution comes from knowing in advance what they want to do and then just aiming to just do that. Whereas coming up with a plan, if you're a certain type of one-dimensional player, that'll actually make your game worse, because now you're going to try something totally off the wall and new, and you're not really prepared for it. You don't know how you're going to do it. You might have even been better sticking with your original plan. But Rapha is actually someone where he can actually read what's happening and switch up, like, okay, now next time I'm going to do this. But maybe a minute later, you know.
And that's always the thing as well, like, when you... I think you were talking about this before with the players who are very reactionary. They kind of get put in this kind of overwhelming situation, both in the game and psychologically, that they're not prepared to deal with. And that's kind of the amazing thing about, that's why making adjustments is so hard, because that's kind of what it is. It's like being able to react. And because of the way like Rapha thinks about the game, he's able to constantly put himself in maybe new situations, but deal with it comfortably, because of the tools that he's developed are always going to give him comfort, despite the fact that he's in territory he hasn't been in before. So he's always, like, he'll never go into that situation where he's too much in his head, or too in a conscious mode of thinking, like, oh, how do I deal with this? It's always going to be like, oh, he knows already how to deal with it, even though he hasn't seen it before, or been in that situation before. So it's his mindset and his approach is very, very cool to see. And
because the thing is, a lot of players, okay, even if they start losing the game, okay, so the first third of the game's gone really badly for them. So they must know internally that my plan isn't really working here. My plan's maybe flawed in some sense. Because they don't have that ability, which is very rare, to be able to read what's going on and read the correct decision to make now and then apply it. Instead, they sort of have to be like, I'm still just going to have to play it out and hope everything goes extremely my way and it works somehow. And so they're sort of willing to play the game out when conceptually they're already losing. And so that means that as the game plays out, they're going to hit the shots you expect. The other one's going to, his position is going to be slightly better a lot of the time. He's going to take more armors. And so you're going to lose overall unless something absolute anomaly happens. Whereas like players like Rapha, and even I'd put Cooler in this category as well, they can actually adapt as the game goes on and realize like, okay, maybe the pace is too bad for me at this point, but if I actually slow the game down, I can not only get back into it, but then maybe the game goes in my favor. And so they can actually make these, it's a bunch of skills added together. It's the ability to read what's going on, figure out a strategy that will actually work that you weren't using already, and then to apply it as well. Those are like three separate skills. See what I mean? When I break it down like that, you see how hard it is. Whereas it sounds easy to go, oh, well, I could see that I was doing something wrong there, so I'll just do the right thing next time. Like, it's not as simple as that. It's a bunch of skills they've added all together. And crucially, like you were saying, you need like the nerve to be able to pull it off.
Yeah, sometimes trying to apply something like that in a game, like you can maybe like have those first 2 bits, but then when it comes to actual implementation on the fly, it's like that throws you off too much. Like that throws off what you practice too much, because that's like kind of this is why like I think practice is so incredibly important. Like there's this Korean philosophy almost where, you know, just put the hours in, because that's, I mean, I don't know how it is and how the coaches train them specifically, but what it really seems like from the outside is work ethic and just put the hours in. It's kind of like this dumbed down version of practice where if you just play enough you get good, whereas oh my god, Mellow getting completely caught off guard there. But like the point I'm trying to make is that you can really put up walls and stuff in your play if your practice is in a way where it's actually going to put into your routine things that actually stop you being able to readily adapt to things, because your routine actually blocks it. Because your routine is trying to take over when you're actually trying to implement something that you're trying to adapt in the game. See what I mean?
That's also why some players will look bad, actually, even if they're very skilled.
Yeah.
Because if they practice one way and they only ever play that way, then they're setting everything up to look amazing when that's working.
Yeah.
But then when they try something on the fly, suddenly, you know, their aim goes completely terrible, their movement's all messed up, and they're not making the jumps properly, because everything is now like, you're just seeing them at their base level with nothing added on, you know.
And I think it's one of the reasons why, if you like look at a player like Cypher, it's like so gorgeous to watch him play, because he just like he's like a genius of the game, where he's just got this amazing intuition about every situation. Like he hasn't, like the way he plays, it's not really based on routine. It's just like he just understands at a core level to himself how to play certain situations. It's
he is like the ultimate tactical player, where he isn't coming in like someone like Kula or Rapha. They're analytically breaking the game down, and they're so good at it before the game. They have a really good plan going in. Then they'll make tweaks to the plan as the game goes on. Every now and then, maybe introduce a totally new plan. But in general, their basic plans are good enough anyway, and they just aim to create situations which are positive for them all the time. Where someone like Cypher is so incredible that his natural style is to create chaotic situations that are going to benefit him, because he'll make the right decision in that moment from intuition, you know, just sensing, oh, this is what I do now. And he won't hesitate, he'll just do that move, okay? Now, when he would face Rapha, that actually sometimes could bite him, because then Rapha could put him in situations where it wouldn't be favorable for him. So his tweak to that was then to add in a little bit of a defensive game, like sometimes figure out a time when it's not positive for my game to be like that. And so he kind of just made like a hybrid between the two. But I don't think you can just go, in general, if you want to be the best, you can't just have one or the other, because eventually you'll meet the right player with the other style that'll counter yours, you know. Yeah. So if the guys who tend to be dominant, they have a little bit of give in their game like this, where they have an overall style, but then they have a little tweak that's almost built in for that player or something, you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite true.
That's why Cypher is the most fun to watch, though, because the difference is when he's completely rolling, it doesn't feel like, oh, he already knew he was doing it. It's just like he feels like, no, I can do that now, so he just does.
Yeah.
So I just go here and kill him. Oh, I'll forget about that item. I'll just go back here and kill him again, and I'll do this over here. Now, perfect jump, rocket, everything. Everything just flows.
It's quite amazing, because like I think I brought this up to you yesterday about Quake Quad. Like theoretically, some situations which are theoretically correct, like when you take the game to a really, really, really high level, the whole like idea of like a percentage play, like you'd have in poker or something, where okay, you know, every time 80% of the time I'm going to win this pot when, you know, or whatever. In Quake, you're going to have similar situations, but some players are so good that they shift the percentages so much that they will do things that look theoretically incorrect, but because of their sheer like insane high level of skill, they're able to that's actually a correct decision for them and only that person. And I think a lot of the time that's kind of like what the principle that someone like Evil operates under, because he takes his skill and execution to this extra level where the stuff that he does, like for example, I was talking about when you're trading a couple deaths to put their stack low enough that you can challenge them before an item spawns. Well, Evil can much more effectively do that strategy against anyone because, well, he can do that better than anyone else because he has such a high damage output and he can stay alive for longer because his dodging aggressively is so good that then that becomes like this strategy that for him, he can do that in loads of spots where no one else can.
And we saw that Cooler is a famous person where his dodging provided the same scenario. The same kind of damage output with the same shots versus Cooler doesn't give you as much damage because he dodges so much better.
Yeah.
And he can then abuse that. Sometimes he can take a fight with less armor than he should even have, knowing I'll probably be able to survive this if I dodge properly. And the extreme example would be, this is one of the reasons, the principle you were talking before about how the percentages will change to what they appear to be in the play versus everyone else. That's why Avec would do so badly against Rapha, because Avec was actually used to abusing that principle himself.
Yeah.
He would go into a fight and force a scenario where he only had like a 40% chance to win on paper, but he'd make it 60% by virtue of his incredible aim and his ability to fight. But then versus Rapha, he'd do the same thing, but suddenly that percentage was only 20% because Rapha would have the better positioning all the time.
Yeah. And then Avec
yeah, and then Avec would lose, unfortunately.
You have lost.
And Mellow starts off the series, or rather the Lost World, with
-1.
-1, melting into the lava there.
Doesn't bode well for the entertainment value of this particular map, I don't think. Is this the round of 8 as well?
Yeah, this is best of 3. So I'm just going to double check everything. We can see how everything's progressing as well. I can give everyone a quick rundown of what the brackets look like right now. And but you were someone that was quite critical of Rapha's movie actually, and as we're talking about Rapha, you can maybe reiterate what
I didn't think it was very good. The problem with it was a frag movie, and it was made as a straight up frag movie. And the problem was, Rapha isn't really that sort of a player where he has that many crazy highlights. And so when you watch this movie, I even said this to someone who thought it was good. I was like, do you even remember 2 or 3 moments that were absolutely crazy in this movie? And they were like, no, I guess I didn't, but I enjoyed it anyway, you know. And that was the problem. I didn't see what the benefit to it. It was just okay to me. Whereas, to me, a Rapha movie should definitely have been amazing. Because I just think of it like this. Remember the Cooler 2010-2011 movie? This movie was like the perfect movie because it highlighted Cooler's style. Not only did it have good frags, but it showed a little bit extra, right? It let the rounds breathe a bit with commentary where you could actually see a brilliant move he pulled off. Or show where he's in an overtime, where he's 1 frag down with 10 seconds to go, but he evens it up and then he takes the kill and he wins in overtime as well. And so...
Yeah, she showed you Jewel rather than...
Yeah, you were showing also his style, you know. Yeah. You were showing like the impact it had. Whereas... to me, that movie existing is part of why the Rapha movie wasn't so good. Because it showed, okay, well, Rapha's another player like this. So take an approach like this, try and embody his style in the game. And there's a million cool moments where Rapha does a totally unexpected thing, or he does like an amazing move, which if you show how he killed someone 2 rounds before, 2 minutes ago or something, you'd see like, oh, I see where he even got the inception of that and how he set it up. And that would be really cool as a movie. But instead, they just went for a straight frag movie. And so to me, you've sort of picked the least skilled, in terms of aiming skill, player out of the top 10, and you've made a straight frag movie that only shows his skill. So to me, it's like a really big missed opportunity.
Oh, hopefully
I mean, if you're going to make a movie like that, don't make it about Rapha. Make it about, like, how about making it about Sparty or something, you know?
Unfortunately, Mellow's actually, he's found himself on Lost World with none other than Rapha. He could be considered to be one of the best Lost World players.
I mean, in many ways, you know, Rapha could have been hung up like that position on 22 or whatever it was.
Only I saw that.
Referencing our original conversation.
Yeah.
It's a good job you couldn't see that.
Yeah, that's pretty
gesture I did
appropriate.
there, yeah.
Just for me. So this is a semi-final. So Rapha will secure his spot in the final. Should he win this?
You see, anyone who thinks that, you know, we're not talking about this game enough, what we're doing is, since Rapha's going to be in the final, we're just giving you a really good preview, so then the final's just awesome, because you've got all this information. It's going to play into the way you watch the final. It's not at all that this game's been boring and we've just been waffling on about some stuff.
Yeah, it's a shame actually that 0-4 is not playing. Because 0-4 is actually putting in a lot of hours up to QuakeCon. And he's, of course, an amazing player. I mean, he really is.
Well, he's also in the perfect region, okay, because if you put 0-4 against Cypher, Evil, I think these guys are going to brutalize him. But if you put 0-4 against Rapha, where, again, Rapha doesn't have that sick aim, 0-4's always had good aim. Yeah. And 0-4's sort of like halfway between a Rapha and a Cooler type person in terms of how he thinks about the game. It means that they're going to have, a bit like when Rapha plays Cooler, the reason the games are always good is because it's always like a chess match of how they're playing, and you see the same thing. And I know for a fact that from conversations, Rapha has actually directly taken things from 0-4, where he's been sort of almost like a mentor to some degree. You know, they've talked a lot in private, discussed situations, how you approach a certain type of opponent. He would even, for some tournaments, he would send him some like notes, like, oh, for this player you're playing now, like I think maybe you should do this. And so they are people who have a similar way of thinking, and crucially, they know how each other thinks. That's what makes when they play it tends to be quite a good game actually. Even though in theory, you know, Rapha's still around his prime, and 0-4 is supposedly, you know, half a decade or more away from his prime.
Yeah, that was always the interesting thing about 0-4, because you can actually say that 0-4 was the most dominant player in perhaps the most competitive era of Duel. For Quake 3. I think it's an argument you can make. Of course, there was like a few eras, like Fatality had a small era for like a year and a half or something, and then it was 0-4 for 2 or 3 years, and then Cooler took over. And after Cooler, I guess it was Cypher.
0-4 actually, believe it or not, picked the best period to be the best. I mean, obviously you didn't really pick it. I'm just in a
you win like 20, 30k.
Yeah, everything was 20k, 30k first place. There was 2 or 3 big tournaments a year. He picked the perfect time to have a dominant run where he just made a lot in a short amount of time.
Wasn't QuakeCon like 40k for first at one point?
I don't think QuakeCon ever was. Actually, the CPL Fatality one was 40k. That Razer CPL.
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned Razer there because it's a sponsor of FACEIT, so just find out a way to work in 13-year-old references to a 2013 show.
Oh, my God. All right, so Rapha's 10 to -1 right now. So, I mean, some blowout games. I mean, there's not much really to say about it. I mean, it's somewhat expected when you put the best player in the world against, because a lot of these.
I know, you know. I mean, if you throw a tuner in with a great white, then it's not much of a fight.
But the thing is, I mean, it's really a story, a sad tale of how the North American scene has, unfortunately, I mean, it wasn't able to weather, I don't know, the general climate that Europe was able to. I mean, Europe was able to kind of keep a community large enough alive that it was kind of self-sustainable.
Well, sadly, there's always been a component in American esports that I'm going to explain to you because you'll appreciate it as someone from the UK, okay?
Is it
this is what has plagued the UK. Okay. In the UK, the prevailing philosophy goes like this. Unless you're making loads of money and it's your full-time job, then if you try as though it was a full-time job, but you're just playing as a part-time player and you're for fun, then if you try, then you're sort of a loser. Because if we're both playing and I'm really talented, but I didn't really try, and you practiced and you beat me, well, you're just a loser. You only won because you practiced. Whereas in other countries, this isn't the case at all. You're applauded for trying and beating me, you know.
Isn't this generally just Western philosophy?
But it's especially noticed in these countries, though. Because for example, we're talking about Cooler. Yeah. Cooler will try, even though there's no money on the line, really, just to compared to the old days, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas, unfortunately, a lot of the big NA players, especially if they used to play in the era when you could get a lot of money for 4th place or just being sponsored, part of the reason they won't play at all is because they're like, oh, well, I don't want to be seen being beaten when I don't practice or whatever, or oh, I don't want to seem like I'm trying when it's not a real pro sport anymore. Whereas I don't get the same sense in you, because a lot of the players do just play for the love of playing now.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason for Cypher really to play anymore. He's not making so much money that it's like super duper salary. Part of why he's playing this because he's one of the best and it's fun to be the best and it's just fun for the sake of the game, you know. Whereas I've noticed that's something that's always plagued NA esports. But like I was saying, I think that it's one of the weird areas where the UK is almost closer to NA in that respect, the mentality, than it is to the other European countries. Because this is what always held the UK back as well, was this notion of like, you have to try and win in a game where you need to try to some degree, but if you try too much, then you're a loser somehow. Which is bizarre, because other countries just go, well, we're nerds, so obviously they're going to try and win the game.
It's, I don't know if you ever read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books.
Of who?
Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell? No, I haven't read
He's talking about, this, I think it's in Outliers, this book, this bit might have been in one of his books. He basically was putting the point across that culturally, I mean, you have this thing like talent versus work ethic. Like talent is this thing that's like heralded as the holy grail. Like if you have, it's like this scene from like Lion King where he's holding up Simba or whatever. Like this guy's got talent, he's amazing. We should just throw everything at him. Whereas in the media, that's like portrayed as this amazing thing. Whereas no one talks about work ethic. It's like not this thing that's give any caring about.
Well, here's actually a key difference.
Asia,
continue the point.
In Asia, it's like completely different. And one of the points he was making is that there's this stereotype that like people from Asian countries are better at mathematics. Statistically so. Statistically, it's the truth. But he was actually saying that like mathematics is one of these things where it's actually about work ethic as opposed to talent. Like if you just sit in front of something math long enough, that's kind of what it's about. You just sit in front of it long enough, eventually you'll be like, I get it. That's like kind of how math works. For like the way these stats were like compiled, like it's not like PhD math level or something like that. So that was his idea, and he was basically just displaying that the West is very much lazier culturally, and Asia has a much higher emphasis on work ethic over talent. They don't really care about talent as much.
Well, I've literally seen this in Korean esports. What happens is, in the West, it's perfectly acceptable to be incredibly talented, but then not practice that much. And either win or maybe you come second, okay? And if you come second without practicing much, people are like, wow, you're amazing. You're so talented that you can do it. They almost like that better than the idea of if you practiced loads and you came third. They like the idea that you didn't practice much, but you came second. Wow, that's so sexy as a story. Whereas in Asia, if you were incredibly talented and you came second, people would be like, you're pathetic. If you'd have practiced, you'd have come first. So to them, if you're talented, you have even less excuse not to practice very, very hard, because you should be the absolute best. You should have won for certain.
That's pretty true. And also what you're saying, like I actually remember seeing this a lot in a certain period in ES reality. So many people would just like vehemently defend or attack certain players where it's like, like the whole like people lying about practice, that was like everyone. Everyone would lie about practice because there was this huge stigma. Like you didn't want to be perceived as this person who practiced a lot, because if you practiced a lot and had like bad results, it like looks really bad on you. But if you say that you like don't practice but you do really well, it's like it makes it look like you're talented, which is like what everyone wants to like,
I also think there's a psychological component, where people actively don't practice because they always want to believe in their mind, well, I am so talented. If I had practiced, I would have won that tournament. Whereas if you practice and then you go to the tournament and you lose, well, there's no longer even any debate. You wouldn't have won that tournament. You're actually going to get to know for sure. So I think there's an insecurity where deep down, those people actually, whether they can admit it, they're sort of deep down thinking like, I probably wouldn't win that tournament. So if I practice, I'll actually have to prove that I probably wouldn't. And so instead, I want to at least have the dream that I could have done it. Whereas really, maybe you could have, maybe you couldn't. But the only way to really find out is to practice.
Yeah, it's completely true. And just to like update viewers, we just saw a semi-final played. Rapha has secured his spot in the grand finals of the North American Sunday Cup here. And we're moving on to the next semi-final. It's going to be Apparition versus Chance.